Today we're bringing you another underrated classic zombie film, Quarantine 2, Terminal. Compared to the storyline of Quarantine, Quarantine 2, Terminal features an original plot created by the director himself. It also abandons the found footage style and moves the setting to a more intense location, a plane. The storyline follows the same virus outbreak as the one in the apartment building. On a flight about to depart from Los Angeles, passengers are heading to Florida as usual, unaware that their nightmare is about to begin. As the plane prepares for takeoff, passengers start stowing their luggage. Kindergarten teacher Henry tries to place a hamster cage on the overhead shelf. Helpful. Ralph steps in to assist, but accidentally gets bitten by the hamster. Since the cage is too large, flight attendant Jenny takes it to the cargo hold for checked baggage. Everything is ready, and the plane takes off. As soon as the plane reaches cruising altitude, Henry sees news of the apartment building incident on his phone. Jenny, sitting beside him, asks what happened. Henry says he's not sure and jokes that thankfully they already left Los Angeles. Suddenly, Jenny notices that Ralph, sitting in the back, is slumped over in an unusual way. Jenny rushed over to check on him, but Ralph suddenly turned around, startling her, then threw up all over her. Jenny quickly calls her colleague Paula for help. When Paula arrives and sees what's going on, she immediately reports the situation to Captain Forrest. Meanwhile, Ralph insists he wants to get off the plane, and Jenny tries to calm him down. The unexpected incident makes the other passengers nervous. To prevent a possible contagious illness, Paula brings a mask to put on Ralph and tells Jenny to go clean up her contaminated uniform. While Jenny leaves, she doesn't notice a passenger's cat licking the vomit on the floor. As she enters the galley and takes off her top, something terrifying happens. Ralph suddenly goes berserk and charges forward, attempting to break into the cockpit to stop the flight. Co-pilot Wilsey sees Ralph foaming at the mouth through the peephole and knows something is seriously wrong. Captain Forrest quickly contacts ground control to report the situation. Passengers rush in to restrain Ralph, tying him up tightly with rope. Ground control responds quickly. For safety reasons, the airline orders the plane to return immediately. On the way back, the plane encounters heavy turbulence and starts shaking violently. The two flight attendants help Ralph back into a seat. Just as Paula is about to fasten his seatbelt, Ralph suddenly opens his bloodshot eyes and bites her lip. Her scream pierces through the cabin. Ralph tries to attack others, but clever passengers cover his eyes with clothing and forcefully lock him in the bathroom. Crisis averted. The good news is the plane has landed safely. The bad news is Paula's condition is very serious. Luckily, one of the passengers, Shyla, is a nurse and quickly tends to Paula's wound. Strangely, the airline hasn't followed procedure. There's no ambulance waiting, and no gate has been cleared for the plane. With no other choice, Captain Forrest taxis the plane to the nearest available gate. Baggage handler Ed is confused because his shift is over and he hasn't received any instructions from his supervisor. With the situation urgent, Jenny skips the explanation and begins evacuating the passengers. Seeing how scared everyone is, Ed realizes something must be wrong and steps in to help. Because the wheelchair had been given to the injured Paula, Doc, who had limited mobility, and his wife Bev were forced to stay behind. As Ed leads the passengers to exit, they discover that the gate is mysteriously locked. They try calling the control center, but no one responds. When Shyla says one of the flight attendants needs urgent medical care, Ed decides to lead them through the cargo passage. Before leaving, Jenny returns to report to the captain and sees Forrest and Wilsey struggling to hold the door shut to keep Ralph from getting out. Forrest tells Jenny to go find help, and she quickly follows the group. With Ed leading, the group moves through the cargo area, hoping to reach the tarmac from there. But to their shock, the steel gate to the tarmac is also locked. Ed has never seen anything like this. The gate is automatic, and he doesn't have a key to open it. After inspecting the area, Ed comes to a chilling conclusion. They've been sealed in, as if some emergency protocol has been activated. Surveillance cameras cover the entire cargo area. The cameras are moving. Someone is watching their every move. Everyone is terrified. They don't understand why they're being isolated. Poor Ed becomes the target of their frustration. As tensions rise, the sound of sirens suddenly blares from outside. George walks to the window and sees that the tarmac is filled with police cars and fire trucks. There's even a helicopter hovering overhead. Then, to everyone's confusion, the police make an announcement through a loudspeaker. The cargo area has been forcibly quarantined. No one is allowed to leave. Someone will be sent in shortly to assist them. The group was growing more and more panicked. Jenny tries to contact the outside world, only to realize their signal is blocked. Everyone begins to complain. Some want to sue the airline. Others blame Jenny for what's happening. Only Shyla stays focused on Paula's condition. She's in critical condition and can't wait any longer. She urgently needs a first aid kit to stop the bleeding, and she has one in her checked luggage. Jenny had no choice but to ask Ed for help in entering the cargo hold. A few passengers joined them to retrieve their belongings, while the others stayed behind to wait. As they reached the stairs, the entire cargo area suddenly lost power, and the passage back to the cabin went completely dark. Forrest and Wilsey were nowhere to be seen. They carefully stepped into the cabin, which was pitch black, with no sign of anyone inside. Jenny instantly had a bad feeling. Trembling, she opened the bathroom door, only to find Ralph missing. All that was left were bloodstains covering the walls, sending chills down her spine. Just as they were trying to open the cargo hold, a figure suddenly appeared on one of the seats, giving them a fright. It was Doc, but his wife was nowhere to be found. Due to his Parkinson's, Doc couldn't speak and could only signal with his eyes for them to unbuckle his seatbelt. They opened the cargo hold. Preston stayed behind to watch over Doc while the others entered the cargo area. They began searching for their luggage. Jenny quickly found Henry's hamster cage, but because of the turbulence during landing, the cage had come open, and the hamster was gone. Neil retrieved the handgun from his backpack. Having a weapon in a situation like this definitely brought a greater sense of security. Soon, Jenny also found Shyla's backpack. Just as she was about to call everyone to leave, Ed was suddenly attacked by a rat. Yes, it was the same hamster that had escaped earlier. Luckily, Ed wasn't bitten. Jenny urged everyone to leave immediately. But just as she peeked out from the cargo hold entrance, she realized that Preston and Doc were both gone. She swept the flashlight around only to suddenly catch a glimpse of a zombie darting past the end of the hallway. Though it was just a split second, Jenny knew it was Wilsey. Then she heard a noise behind her. Sensing danger, Jenny slowly turned around, only to see Forrest, now a zombie. He grabbed her violently. Hearing the commotion, Henry rushed in and pulled the zombie off Jenny, but now he was in danger himself. Ed also crawled out to help, but even armed with a metal rod, he couldn't stop the zombie. Finally, it was Niall who didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger and brought the zombie down. This moment made them realize anyone attacked by the infected would eventually turn. They wasted no time and ran back toward the cargo area. When they reached the passage, they found Preston and Doc lying on the ground. They had been attacked by a zombie. Doc seemed fine, but Preston was covered in blood. He was beyond saving. They rushed Doc back to the cargo area and began checking him for bite marks. But Jenny, trailing behind, heard another strange noise. She followed it and found Bev, but something was clearly off about her. The next second, Bev lunged straight at Jenny. Screaming, Jenny ran back to the cargo area. The others quickly slammed the steel door shut, but Bev's upper body got stuck in the doorway. Henry and Ed stayed behind to block the door, while Jenny and Niall took Doc and went ahead. Jenny, Niall, and Doc reunited with the others. Shyla, now with her first aid kit, began treating Paula's wound. Hearing what had happened on the plane, everyone was stunned. Jenny didn't get a moment to rest and immediately headed back to find Ed and Henry. On the way, she spotted some bloodstains on the ground. Could it be a sign that a zombie had already entered the cargo area? Thankfully, Ed and Henry had already secured the steel door, but the blood on the floor still made Jenny uneasy. When they came back from the plane, they hadn't seen the infected Wilsey or Ralph. So to be safe, Jenny gathered everyone to discuss their next move. One thing was clear, a terrifying virus had broken out on the plane. Anyone who got bitten would be infected. That's also why they were being quarantined. The most important thing now was to check whether anyone else had been bitten to ensure everyone's safety. Everyone began voicing their opinions, but no one noticed Doc sitting silently nearby. Doc looked up and saw the missing hamster, but he couldn't move or speak until the hamster jumped onto his head and bit him hard. George finally noticed something was wrong and rushed over to swat the hamster away. Ed and Henry quickly caught the hamster and locked it in a bucket. Doc, now bitten, was quarantined with Paula inside a truck trailer. Then Ed noticed something on the hamster's leg. He put on gloves and picked it up, only to find a tag. It was the kind of tag used only on lab mice. The long tail also confirmed it wasn't a hamster. It was clearly a lab rat, and the virus it carried was the real cause of this entire outbreak. Since Henry was the one who brought the hamster onto the plane, he naturally became the prime suspect. But Henry claimed he had no idea. He said a parent at his kindergarten gave him the animal, and he thought it was just a hamster, so he brought it on the flight. His explanation seemed unconvincing. Jenny didn't believe him either. She pulled him aside to question him further. But suddenly, Zombie Ralph burst in, shoving Henry aside and grabbing Jenny. Thankfully, Ed heard the commotion and rushed in. He looped a rope around Ralph's neck and yanked him back. Then everyone grabbed hold of the rope and pulled together, until they strangled Ralph to death. Just then, a message came through on Ed's radio. The CDC was about to send people in. Everyone thought rescue was finally here. 4 fully armed CDC agents arrived at the scene. They were unfriendly and ordered everyone to stay back. They took the lab rat in the bucket and confiscated Niall's handgun. Then they dragged out the 2 infected individuals and injected each of them with an unknown substance. It seemed to be some kind of vaccine. They said everyone present would need to be injected. Otherwise, no one would be allowed to leave alive. People were skeptical about the so-called vaccine. No one wanted to be injected with something unknown, especially since they hadn't been infected. Louise volunteered in hopes of leaving sooner, but just as the CDC agent was about to give her the shot, the cat in Louise's arms suddenly mutated and attacked her. The CDC agent immediately realized the cat was infected and shot at it without hesitation, but he failed to kill it. Worse, he was ambushed from behind by Doc, who had just transformed. No one expected the virus to restore movement to someone who had been fully paralyzed. Seeing this, the other agents didn't hesitate. They immediately shot Doc dead and then panicked, dragging the wounded with them to escape. But what they didn't know was that the moment they stepped into this place, their superiors had already decided to sacrifice them as well. Sure enough, the main gate had been locked tight. Still, the armed containment personnel refused to give in. They pulled their triggers and forced the steel door open. As they walked out, one of the passengers followed behind. But they had barely stepped outside when a storm of gunfire erupted. It seemed that to stop the virus from spreading, anyone could be sacrificed. One CDC officer managed to survive and was pulled back inside by the others. But the loud gunfire triggered horrifying screams echoing throughout the cargo area. To avoid being attacked by zombies, everyone rushed into a shipping container for shelter. But Neil and his wife Susan never caught up. It turned out Neil had been infected without anyone knowing. He dragged Susan away right as she was about to climb into the container. Then the lights inside the container came on. Jenny remembered Paula was still outside and wanted to bring her in, but Henry quickly stopped her, pointing out that they couldn't be sure if Paula had turned, and going out would be a death sentence. Henry then aimed a gun at the officer and demanded answers. Unexpectedly, the man revealed they weren't CDC at all, but part of the Department of Homeland Security's bioterrorism unit. He explained that a similar outbreak had occurred in an apartment building in Los Angeles, and no one made it out alive. They had found a lab inside and suspected that extremists were creating a bioweapon to launch a biochemical attack, but it seemed they never managed to produce a cure. The infected lab rats escaped, and their own people were infected too. Even the military had no idea how to handle the situation. In other words, no one here was expected to survive. After saying this, the officer suddenly snatched the gun from Henry's hand and took his own life in front of everyone. Despair quickly spread again. Were they really going to die here? Just then, Ed remembered something. Because this cargo area always flooded during heavy rain, the company had built a maintenance tunnel that led outside. Almost no one knew about it. They could escape through there. Before he could finish his sentence, a hand suddenly reached down from the top of the container and grabbed Ed. It was Zombie Wilsey. Thinking fast, Ed signaled George to activate the hydraulic press. The container slowly lifted until it crushed the zombie into a bloody pulp. With the crisis averted, they rushed out of the container and followed Ed toward the office. Since George didn't know the exact location of the maintenance tunnel, they needed to find the cargo facility's blueprints, which marked the tunnel's location. But along the way, they noticed Henry was no longer with them. Still, there was no time to search for him. They had to keep moving. Suddenly, zombie Paula appeared in their path. Jenny tried to bring Paula back to her senses, but it was clearly no use. With no other choice, she gathered her courage, picked up a wrench, and put an end to her dearest colleague. There was no time to grieve. They continued on toward the office. Soon, they arrived and successfully located the blueprints, which showed that the maintenance tunnel was inside a ventilation shaft in the break room. Meanwhile, George had somehow gotten hold of Henry's bag and found a disturbing secret. But before he could share it, two zombies suddenly appeared in the office, Zombie Neil and Zombie Susan. Just when they thought it was over, Henry reappeared out of nowhere. He fired several shots, killing both zombies and saving everyone. But he had already been bitten. George pulled out a vial from Henry's backpack and demanded to know if he came back for the cure. With no way to hide the truth, Henry admitted it and told George to hand over the vial. It turned out Henry was never a kindergarten teacher. He was actually part of the extremist group behind the virus. He brought the lab rat onto the plane to release the virus in another city as part of a bioterror attack, aiming to kill as many people as possible. Hearing this, Ed couldn't control his rage and lunged at him, only to be shot dead by Henry. Henry snatched the vial from George, injected himself, and began explaining their plan. The virus leak in the Los Angeles apartment was an accident, but also the outcome they had hoped for. Some people who shared his beliefs wanted to use the virus to trigger a global disaster. Their goal was to reduce the ever-growing population and save the environment, which had been severely damaged by humanity. They believed only a massive plague could cleanse the earth, and Henry's mission was to spread the virus in Florida. With that, he took George hostage, punched Jenny to the ground, and left the office. He clearly planned to escape through the maintenance tunnel. Shyla and George immediately chased after him, but Henry's punch had left Jenny too weak to keep going. so they had to split up. Shyla went ahead alone. After resting for a moment, Jenny followed. On the way, she was suddenly attacked by a zombie. She ran with everything she had, being chased all the way onto a conveyor belt. At the last moment, she used the rollers to outmaneuver and kill the zombie. But before she could catch her breath, she saw another zombie with a bizarre appearance. Fortunately, it hadn't noticed her yet. Jenny soon reunited with Shyla. Though Shyla hadn't caught up to Henry, she had found a pair of thermal goggles dropped by the soldiers. She handed the goggles to Jenny. When Jenny put on the goggles, she noticed a bite mark on Shyla's arm. It turned out Shyla had already been bitten by a zombie. Knowing what was coming, Shyla walked out without hesitation to buy Jenny some time. Through the thermal goggles, Jenny watched as Shyla loudly attracted the zombies, only to be overwhelmed by them within seconds. Shyla's sacrifice gave Jenny a chance to escape. She reached the entrance to the maintenance tunnel and found George crouched inside. Next to him was a flashlight and a handgun, but Henry was nowhere in sight. George told Jenny that Henry had turned. The injection hadn't worked. He warned her that it was dangerous down there and begged her not to come down. But Jenny couldn't just leave George behind. As she climbed down the ladder, a drop of blood splattered on the lens of her goggles. She looked up and saw zombie Henry lunging straight at her. He grabbed her instantly, and her thermal goggles fell to the floor. George quickly fumbled for the goggles, put them on, and saw Jenny under attack. He picked up the handgun and fired at Henry without hesitation, again and again, until Henry finally dropped. Jenny put the goggles back on and saw Henry still twitching on the ground. Without a word, she grabbed a thick, heavy rod and struck him again to finish the job. Just as they survived this attack, a massive explosion shook the tunnel from above. The military was planning to incinerate everything, to wipe out the virus. Sensing the urgency, Jenny kicked open the emergency escape tunnel. She handed the goggles to George and told him to go first. The two of them crawled in, Jenny right behind George. But as they crawled, Jenny's consciousness began to fade. George turned around and saw that Jenny had already been bitten. There was a deep, obvious bite mark on her abdomen. Her expression was starting to twist. Jenny urged George to keep crawling. George said nothing. He obeyed, but his heart was heavy with worry. He glanced back again and saw Jenny coughing up blood. It was a clear sign that she was about to turn. Even so, Jenny clung to her final shred of sanity. She begged George not to stop. Tears streaming down his face, George crawled forward. Finally, he saw a light up ahead. It was the exit. A few steel bars blocked the way, but George's small frame allowed him to squeeze through. He turned back and looked into the dark tunnel, but Jenny was nowhere to be seen. Refusing to give up, George screamed her name over and over again, but the Jenny who emerged from the shadows had already fully turned into a zombie. She nearly bit him. George tossed off his jacket just in time to escape. Seeing the big sister who had just saved him turn into a monster, his heart broke, but there was no time to mourn. He had to leave, because danger could be right around the corner. The thermal goggles left behind on the ground silently declared this nightmare was far from over, because George wasn't the only one who made it out. The virus-carrying cat escaped, too.